He had arranged the finest care money could find for his mother, but he had never once asked her what she was afraid of in the dark. Callum Decker stepped through the front door of his mother's house on a Thursday afternoon in late October, carrying his phone in one hand and a half-eaten coffee from the drive-thru in the other. He was not supposed to be there. His afternoon had cleared by accident. A client in Mississauga had rescheduled, and instead of driving back to the office in Toronto, Callum had turned west without fully deciding to. That was what he told himself anyway. The house was a two-story in Burlington, on a quiet street with maple trees that had gone orange and red overnight. His mother, Dorothy Decker, had lived there for 31 years. She had raised Callum and his sister Nora in that house. She had shoveled the driveway herself until her hands gave out. She had kept a garden along the back fence every summer until the summer she couldn't. Now she had a carer who came 5 days a week, a pharmacist who delivered, and a son who called every Sunday at 7 o'clock and always kept it under 15 minutes. Callum used his key. The house smelled different from what he remembered. Something herbal, faintly sweet like dried lavender mixed with something warmer. He stood in the front hallway listening. Upstairs he could hear voices. Or not voices exactly, one voice, low and quiet, and then a long pause and then the sound of running water. He set his coffee on the hall table and went upstairs. The door to his mother's room was open by a few inches. He pushed it slowly. Dorothy sat at the edge of her bed in the afternoon light. She had lost weight since August and her hair, which had once been thick and silvery, had thinned to almost nothing these past 2 months. Chemotherapy had taken most of it. What remained lay fine and pale against her scalp. Beside her, crouched low on a small stool, was a young woman Callum did not recognize. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back and a plain blue cardigan. She held a small pair of scissors and a folded towel, and she was trimming away the last few strands of his mother's hair with a care so slow it looked like something ceremonial. Her face was turned down toward the task, but Callum could see that she had been crying. Not dramatically, just quiet, the way people cry when they think they are alone. Dorothy's hand rested on the young woman's forearm, just resting, not gripping. Callum stood in the doorway and did not move. He had arranged for this house to be managed. He had arranged for a care agency, a visiting nurse, a physiotherapist on Wednesdays, grocery delivery on Fridays. He had given the agency a detailed intake form and received monthly summaries in his email. He had done what a responsible son did from a distance. But in that room, in that light, with his mother's hand resting on the wrist of a young woman he had never met, Callum Decker understood for the first time that he had arranged everything except himself. He stepped back before either of them saw him. Downstairs he stood in the kitchen with his hands braced on the counter and stared at the window above the sink. Outside, the maple in the backyard had turned completely. Every leaf was red. He had not noticed that either. He had always told himself that being useful was the same as being present. He paid for things. He made calls when the agency was slow. He researched oncologists and second opinions and drug trials and clinical studies. He sent his mother articles. He texted links to things that might help. He approved expenses without asking for itemized receipts because he didn't want to make her feel like a budget. He thought that meant something. He had believed it did. But upstairs his mother's hand had reached not for a nurse or a physiotherapist or a professionally trained care aide. It had reached for whoever was there. And the person who was there was a young woman in a blue cardigan who was crying over a pair of scissors. Callum didn't even know her name. He called the agency the next morning. The coordinator, a brisk woman named Sheila, pulled up the file in under 30 seconds. That would be Marta, she said. Marta Voss. She's a home support worker, not a personal care aide, so her scope is limited to light housekeeping, meal prep, errands. She's not authorized to provide personal grooming assistance. If Mrs. Decker required that, a request should have been submitted and we would have. How long has she been coming? Callum said. A pause. She was assigned to your mother's file in June. June. 4 months. Callum had not known her name. I can facilitate that through the agency. If there's a concern about the scope of, no concern, Callum said. I just want to talk to her. Marta Voss arrived at 9 the following Monday morning. Callum was already at the house, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. When she came through the front door and saw him, she slowed slightly, the way people do when they realize a meeting has been arranged for a reason. She was exactly as he remembered from the doorway, steady, quiet. Nothing in her posture gave way. Mr. Decker, she said. Callum, he said, sit down please. She sat across from him. She kept her hands folded on the table and waited without performing patience. That bothered him. He had expected someone who would explain herself right away, fill the silence, justify things. She didn't. I was here Thursday, he said. I saw you, with my mother in her room. Marta met his eyes. Yes. You were cutting her hair, the last of it, she said. She asked me to. She asked you. Yes. Callum looked at his coffee. Your scope of work with the agency is housekeeping. Errands, I know that, so you understand why I'd have questions. I do, she said. And you have every right to ask them. That was not the answer he had expected either. He looked back up at her. Why were you crying, he said. The question landed between them. Marta did not look away. My grandmother, she said. She went through the same thing 3 years ago. The hair was the part that frightened her most. Not the pain, not the appointments. The hair, she said, it felt like disappearing in pieces. Marta's voice stayed even, but something underneath it shifted. I cut hers too, when she asked. I know what it feels like to hold the scissors. Callum was quiet for a moment. My mother has nurses, a physiotherapist. The agency assigned you for cleaning. Marta nodded slowly. She does. They're thorough. Then why was she asking you? Marta looked toward the window. The backyard maple was visible from where they sat. She seemed to be choosing her words not out of caution but out of respect for precision. Because she didn't want it to feel clinical, she said. She wanted it to feel like a choice. Like something she was doing, not something being done to her. Callum pressed his fingers against the side of his coffee mug. Marta continued quietly. Your mother is surrounded by people who monitor her. They check her blood pressure. They adjust her medication. They write notes. They do everything right. She paused. But no one was asking her what she was scared of. No one was sitting with her after the nurse left. She told me once that the hardest part of the night was when the house got quiet and she started thinking about things she couldn't say out loud to anyone who would worry too much. Something in Callum's chest pulled tight. She worries about worrying you, Marta said. She said you have enough on your plate. Callum almost laughed. His mother was in the middle of stage 3 breast cancer, and she was managing her emotional output around his schedule. I didn't know she felt that way, he said. She wouldn't have told you. He looked at her sharply. Not because she doesn't trust you, Marta said carefully. Because she loves you. She's been protecting you from hard things her whole life. She doesn't know how to stop. Callum stood up from the table and walked to the window. The red maple filled most of the glass. He remembered his mother planting it. He had been about 8. She had dug the hole herself and made him hold the sapling while she packed the soil around it, and when they were done she had said, by the time you have kids, that thing will be tall enough to climb. He had forgotten that until now. He turned back to Marta. The agency is going to say you overstepped probably, she said. Did you? She considered it genuinely. I cut her hair because she asked me and because no one else was there to ask. I don't think that was wrong, but I understand if you do. Callum sat back down. He was quiet for longer than he meant to be. She sleeps better with the radio on, Marta said after a moment. Oldies, not news. News makes her anxious. She likes the window cracked even when it's cold, just a little, because she says the house air gets heavy. She takes her tea with 1 sugar and the big left in, not taken out, because she likes it strong. She doesn't ask for these things. I noticed them. Callum realized he had not known any of that. He had visited his mother 41 times since her diagnosis. He had made 41 cups of tea and not once paid attention to whether she wanted the bag left in. I want you to keep coming, he said. Marta looked at him. Not just for the cleaning, he said. I want to know what you notice. I want you to tell me when something changes. He stopped. He started again. I haven't been present the way I should have been. I don't fully know how to fix that yet. But I'd like to try. Marta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she would like that. She's mentioned it. She talked about me.
She talks about you often,
Marta said. She keeps a photo of you on the nightstand. The one where you're a boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing in front of a canoe at some lake. Callum knew the photo. Muskoka, the summer his mother had borrowed a friend's cottage because they couldn't afford their own. He had been terrified of the deep water and spent the whole weekend pretending he wasn't. She said you were brave that summer, Marta said. He looked away. She said you still are. He drove to the house the next morning before work. He didn't call ahead. He brought a paper bag from the bakery on Lakeshore, nothing elaborate, just croissants, and let himself in and went upstairs. Dorothy was awake, sitting up in bed with a thin blanket over her knees. She looked smaller than she had 2 weeks ago. The scarf she wore around her head was pale yellow. When she saw him in the doorway, her face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, pleasure, and then, almost immediately, a kind of careful guardedness. The same look he had seen his whole life, when she was deciding how much to let show. Callum, she said. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, he said. I just came. She watched him settle into the chair beside the bed. He put the bakery bag on the nightstand. You didn't have to, I know, he said. I wanted to. She did not look fully convinced. That was the hardest part. He had built a version of himself in her mind. Efficient, busy, capable, arriving with purpose, and now he was sitting in a chair with no particular agenda and she didn't quite know what to do with him. He didn't either, honestly. Marta told me you liked the radio on at night, he said. I didn't know that. Dorothy's expression shifted. She told you that. She told me a few things. She talks too much, Dorothy said, but her voice had softened. She talks the right amount, Callum said, more than I've been. Dorothy looked at the window. The morning light was thin and gray, the kind that came before real November settled in. She was quiet for a moment and he let her be. I didn't want you to come here and feel sad, she finally said. Mom, I know what it looks like, she said. I know what I look like. I didn't want that to be what you saw when you thought of me. Callum leaned forward and put his hand over hers. It was thinner than it used to be. The skin had lost some of its give. "When I think of you," he said, "I think of the maple tree in the backyard. I think of you digging that hole with a regular shovel and getting dirt on your good coat and not caring." Dorothy made a small sound, almost a laugh. "You were terrible at planting things," Callum said. "I was excellent at planting things. You planted the roses upside down in 2009, that was your uncle's fault." But she was smiling now, just barely, and it reached her eyes. He stayed for 2 hours that morning. He didn't accomplish anything. He drank tea, with the bag left in, because he had paid attention this time. And he listened to her talk about a documentary she had watched, and a neighbor who had left a casserole on the porch, and the particular way the light came through the window in the late afternoon when it hit the quilt on her bed just right. Small things. The kind of things she had probably been saving up to say out loud to someone who wasn't writing notes on a clipboard. Before he left, she caught his hand. "You'll come back?" she said. Not like a question, but close. "Tomorrow," he said. She nodded slowly. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I want to." The call from the agency came that Friday. A coordinator named Raj explained professionally and regretfully that a complaint had been filed by a third party regarding Marta Voss exceeding her authorized scope of work. An internal review had been opened. Pending the outcome, Marta had been temporarily reassigned. Callum was sitting in his office on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Toronto when he took the call. He had a view of the lake and a calendar that was red with meetings and a reputation for being someone who did not let personal things interfere with professional ones. "Who filed the complaint?" he said. Raj hesitated. "I'm not able to share that in detail. What I can tell you is that the concern related to an employee performing personal grooming services. She helped my mother with something my mother asked for," Callum said. "My mother's care is my responsibility. I'm telling you the action was appropriate." "Mr. Decker, our protocol," Callum said. "Today. And note in the file that I've reviewed the situation and I'm satisfied." A pause. "I'd need to confirm with our supervisor that." "I'll hold," Callum said. He did not have to hold long. When he hung up, he sat for a moment looking at the lake. Then he called his sister Nora in Vancouver. She picked up on the second immediately. "She's okay." Nora said you something though. He told her, about Thursday, about the doorway, about Marta, about 41 visits and not knowing how she took her tea. Nora was quiet on the other end for a long time. Then she said, "Cal, I know, I do the same thing," she said. "I call on Sundays, I ask how treatment is going. I send her things in the mail. I think that's..." She stopped. "I thought that was enough." "I thought so too," he said. Another silence. "I'm going to book a flight," Nora said. "She'd like that," Callum said. After he hung up, he stared at the calendar for a while. He had a dinner that evening with a developer from Calgary who was in town for 2 nights only. He had a conference call at 7. He had a file sitting on his desk that needed to be reviewed before Monday. He canceled the dinner. He rescheduled the call. He left the file on the desk. Then he drove to Burlington. He found his mother in the kitchen, which surprised him. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea and a library book open in front of her, and Marta was at the counter slicing an apple into thin pieces and arranging them on a small plate, the way a person arranges things when they know someone's appetite has become unreliable and presentation matters. Dorothy looked up when she heard the door. Her face did the same thing it had done that morning earlier in the week. Surprise. Pleasure. Then the careful adjustment. He was working on that part of himself, the part that had trained her to be careful. "You're here again," she said. "I canceled dinner." She frowned. "Was it important?" "Less important than this," he said. Dorothy looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Marta. Then she said, "Sit down." Marta made tea that actually tastes like tea, not like a bag that touched warm water for 3 seconds. Marta glanced at him from the counter with an expression that was mostly and only very slightly amused. "That was one time," Callum said. "It was every time," Dorothy said. He sat down. Marta placed the apple slices on the table between them and went quietly to fold laundry in the other room. He noticed how she left without making an event of leaving. She simply went, the way someone goes when they understand the room belongs to other people. He and Dorothy sat together until the light outside shifted from gray to the particular dark blue of early November evening. They talked about things that did not matter and things that did. She told him about the summer she and his father had driven to Prince Edward Island before Callum was born and gotten lost for 2 hours on a back road and laughed until they couldn't breathe. She told him she still thought about that drive, sometimes when she was having a hard night. He told her about the canoe, that he had been terrified the whole weekend, that he had been too proud to say so. "I knew," she said. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you needed to decide for yourself that the water was safe." She looked at him over her cup. "You eventually did." He looked at his hands. "I've been afraid," he said, "coming here, seeing you sick. I didn't know what to do and that's scared me more than I knew how to say. So I paid for things and made arrangements and told myself that was the same as showing up." Dorothy set her cup down slowly. "It wasn't," he said. "I know that now." She was quiet for a moment. "You were never good things the same way." "No way." A pause. He once hired a landscaping company to redo the entire front garden because I mentioned the flower bed needed weeding. He thought scale was the same as attention. She almost smiled. He meant well. I mean well too, Callum said. I know you do. She reached across the table. But Callum, you can't fix what's happening to me. No one can. What I need isn't fixing. Her hand was warm over his. I just need you to be in the room. The words were so simple they almost didn't land, and then they did. He turned his hand over and held hers. I'm in the room, he said. Yes, she said quietly. You are. It was Marta who noticed first that something was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late November. Callum had started coming every other day, sometimes more. He had moved a small folding table into the corner of his mother's room so he could work on his laptop while she rested. Close enough that if she woke and wanted company, he was there. He had learned which news programs she could tolerate and which ones made her anxious. He had learned that she liked the blinds half open in the morning and fully closed by afternoon. He had learned to be quiet in a room without filling it with anxious conversation. He was learning, slowly and sometimes badly, but learning. That morning Marta arrived at 8:30 and went upstairs. Callum was already there, working at the small table. Marta said good morning and moved quietly to the dresser to put away clean towels, and then she stopped. She looked at Dorothy, who was asleep. She looked more carefully. Then she came around the bed and checked the pulse in Dorothy's wrist. And then she turned to Callum. Her color's off, she said. And her breathing. He was beside the bed before she finished the sentence. Dorothy's face was pale in a way that was different from the pale he had grown used to. Her breathing was shallow and too fast. Call the nurse, Marta said. I'll stay with her. The nurse was there in 4 minutes. Callum stood back against the wall, watching strangers move around his mother's bed with the practiced efficiency of people who did this often. And for a moment he felt the old uselessness rise in him. The same feeling he'd had standing in that doorway the first time. The feeling of being the wrong kind of capable. Then Marta looked at him from the far side of the bed. She knows you're here, she said. Talk to her. She's asleep. She can hear you. He moved to the chair beside the bed. Dorothy's eyes were closed. The nurse was checking her blood pressure. He reached for his mother's hand. Mom, he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. It's me. I'm right here. Dorothy did not open her eyes, but her fingers moved slightly against his palm. You're all right, he said. I'm not going anywhere. The nurse adjusted something. Made a note. Spoke quietly into a phone. Callum kept his eyes on his mother's face and talked to her about small things. The apple tree in the backyard. How Nora was coming next week. How the maple had gone bare now and the whole street looked like a different place. He did not know if she could hear him. He kept talking anyway. Marta stayed on the other side of the room and did not interfere and did not leave. After 20 minutes, Dorothy's breathing had steadied. The nurse confirmed her vitals were returning to normal. She patted Dorothy's hand with professional briskness and said she'd follow up with the doctor and went downstairs to make her calls. The room became quiet. Dorothy's eyes fluttered and then opened. She looked confused for a moment. Then she found Callum's face. There you are, she said. He almost laughed. She had been the one unconscious. Here I am, he said. You're crying, she said. He hadn't realized. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, she said. Always have been. He laughed, actually laughed in the way that happens when the relief is too big to hold any other shape. Dorothy's mouth curved. Behind them, Marta made a small noise that might have been a breath, or might have been something else. She saved me some embarrassment, Dorothy said, nodding toward Marta. Earlier, I thought I was fine and she thought differently, and she was right as usual. Callum looked back at Marta. She shook her head slightly, meaning it was nothing, meaning don't make a thing of it. He was beginning to understand that this was how she was. She noticed everything and credited herself with nothing. He was going to make a thing of it anyway. Later, when Dorothy had drifted back to sleep and her breathing was even and the house was calm again, Callum followed Marta downstairs. She was filling a glass of water at the sink, and she turned when she heard him come in. Thank you, he said. I didn't do anything except, Marta. He stopped. Thank you, he said again. For June, for the hair, for the radio station, for the tea with the bag left in, for the nights when I wasn't here, for noticing. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was not quite composed. She made it easy. She's easy to notice. She is, he said. I just forgot that for a while. Marta set the glass down. You didn't forget. You were afraid. There's a difference. He didn't answer. But he thought she was probably right. The week Nora arrived, the house felt like itself again for the first time in years. Nora Decker, 43, and had her mother's stubbornness and their father's laugh, and she walked into the Burlington house with a duffel bag and a box of groceries, and immediately took over the kitchen like she had never left. She made soup from scratch the first night. She sat on the edge of Dorothy's bed and talked for 2 hours without stopping about her kids, her neighborhood in East Van, a trip she was planning to Portugal, all the ordinary texture of a life. The kind of conversation that said, without saying it, I still expect you to be here for all of this. Callum watched from the doorway and thought about how long he had been making visits instead of staying. He had started to understand the difference. Marta came in the mornings as usual. She and Nora got along immediately in the way that practical people do. They divided tasks without discussion and moved around each other in the kitchen like they'd done it before. Dorothy watched them both from chair with an expression Callum had not seen on her face in months. Not relief exactly. Something older and quieter. Satisfaction. One morning Callum came downstairs early and found Marta at the kitchen table going through a small notebook. She looked up when he came in. Medication log, she said. I keep one separate from the agency forms, just times and anything I notice. He looked at the notebook. Her handwriting was small and even. The entries went back to June. 4 months of his mother's days recorded by a woman who had been paid to clean the floors. You shouldn't have had to do this alone, he said. Marta closed the notebook. She wasn't alone, she had me. I mean, you shouldn't have been carrying it alone. She considered this. I didn't mind, she said, but I'm glad you're here now. He sat down across from her. Outside the window the backyard was bare and frost-edged and still. The maple had dropped its last leaves a week ago. The branches made clean lines against the gray sky. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why did you stay, past your hours, buying things on your own? You didn't have to. Marta was quiet for a moment. My grandmother died at home, she said. She wanted to, but it took a long time and there were nights when everyone else had gone home and the house was very quiet and she was very frightened. I stayed because I remembered what it was like to be the person who stayed. She looked at the table. And because no one should have to be frightened alone. Not at the end. Callum looked at his hands. She told me something once, Marta said. Your mother. She said the hardest thing about being sick wasn't the pain, it was feeling like a burden. Like she was an inconvenience to the people who loved her most. She paused. I didn't want her to feel that. He closed his eyes for a moment. All those Sunday calls. All those 15-minute check-ins. His mother on the other end saying she was fine. She was managing. He didn't need to worry. And all that time she had been performing okayness to protect him. Because she had spent 68 years making sure the people she loved didn't feel burdened by her needs. He had let her do that. He had been grateful that she made it easy. I have to live with that, he said more to himself than to her. Yes, Marta said. Not unkindly, but you don't have to stop there. Dorothy made it through to February. There was no single dramatic moment, just a slow quieting, day by day until one morning the house was still in a way that was different from other mornings. Callum had been sleeping in the room across the hall for the last 2 weeks. He had heard the change in her breathing at 4 in the morning, and had gone to her and taken her hand, and stayed there until the breathing stopped, and the room became very quiet, and the gray winter light began to come through the curtains. Marta arrived at 7:30 and found him still sitting beside the bed. She didn't say anything. She went and put the kettle on, and when it boiled she brought 2 cups upstairs and set one beside him and took the other to the chair near the window and sat down. She did not fill the silence. She understood that the silence was not empty. After a long time Callum said, she didn't want a fuss. No, Marta said. She'd be annoyed if I made one. Probably. He almost smiled. She told me last week that the only thing she regretted was not going to Portugal. With Nora. Marta looked at her cup. I know, she told me that too. I'm going to send Nora, he said. I'm going to pay for the whole trip. And I'm going to tell her it was Mom's idea. Marta looked at him. Because it was, he said. They sat in the quiet room until the morning had fully arrived and the light had changed and the ordinary sounds of the street outside began. A car starting, a dog, someone shoveling the walk, the world going on the way it did. In the months that followed, Callum found himself doing things he could not have explained to the version of himself from a year ago. He called Nora without a reason. He visited his aunt in Sudbury who he hadn't seen in 4 years. He sat with a colleague going through something difficult and did not look at his phone once. Small things. Things that didn't register anywhere except in the people they were done for. He also set up a small fund. Not a grand foundation, nothing with a plaque or a press release, just a quiet agreement with a local hospice organization. To cover care hours for families who needed more support than they could afford. He called it the Dorothy Fund, though no one outside the organization knew whose name it was or why. Marta was the first person he told. She had taken a position with a palliative care organization in Hamilton by then. She was doing what she had always been doing, just with a title now. He ran into her at a coffee shop near the harbor on a Saturday afternoon in October, and they sat for an hour at a corner table while the rest of the city moved around them. She would have liked that, Marta said when he told her about the fund. She always said the worst part of needing help was feeling like you couldn't ask for it. I know, he said. She told me that. Near the end. Marta wrapped her hands around her cup. She was proud of you. She was proud of the boy I used to be, he said. She was proud of the man you were becoming. Marta said. She said so more than once. He looked out at the harbor. The water was flat and gray. The kind of October afternoon that felt like it was holding its breath before winter. He thought about the canoe at the Muskoka cottage. About standing at the edge of a dock too afraid to jump while his mother watched from a folding chair and didn't say a word about the fear, because she knew he needed to get there himself. He had gotten there. Late, yes. Too late for some things. But not too late for the rest of his life. He thought about something she had said to him in the last week, when her voice had gone thin but her eyes were still clear. She had said, "Callum, I raised you to be good at things, but the best things you ever did was learn to sit still to—" He had held her hand and not said anything, because some things don't need an answer. They just need a witness. That is what she taught him, in the end. Not through speeches or lessons or anything written down. Just by being a person who noticed when someone was cold and put a blanket over their knees without waiting to be asked. By being someone who stayed. He was still learning to be that person. He thought he probably always would be. But he understood now that the learning was the point. That love was not a contract you completed or an obligation you discharged from a safe distance. It was a practice. It was showing up in the small rooms of other people's lives and refusing to check the time. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, a red maple, a cup of tea with the bag left in. It was being present enough to notice what someone needs before they have to ask. And it was knowing, really knowing, not just believing, that one day the chance to say "I'm here" will be gone, and choosing to say it now.